The airfield was burning. Acrid smoke clawed at the sky while the screams of men and women carried across the cracked tarmac. The first shells had fallen only minutes before, tearing through hangars and igniting rows of parked vehicles. What had been a base of order and discipline turned into chaos within seconds, and soldiers scrambled for weapons, cover, and answers. Sergeant Caroline Hale, her boots still slick with aviation fuel from the blast that destroyed the fueling station, sprinted across the open stretch, rifle clutched tight against her chest. The world tilted with every explosion, but her mind stayed sharp. She knew hesitation killed faster than shrapnel. "Move, damn it!" she barked at two privates frozen near the wreckage of a Humvee, their faces pale under the rain of dust and fire. They moved because her tone cut sharper than the incoming mortar whistles. One dove behind a half-crumbled wall, the other clutched a bandaged arm as he staggered after her. Caroline didn't wait. Waiting got people killed. She pushed forward toward the operations building, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound of approaching aircraft thundered overhead. The enemy had moved faster than intelligence suggested. She'd heard the whispers the night before, during chow, rumors of insurgent reinforcements, of advanced anti-air capabilities, of betrayal somewhere in the chain. No one had believed it would hit this soon, not here. Yet now the sky itself seemed to split open with each screaming jet, and the defenders were left scrambling in their own home. Caroline dove through the shattered doorway of the ops building, glass crunching under her weight. Radios blared inside, panicked voices bleeding through the static. Officers barked orders no one could follow clearly. A young comms tech was crying into a headset, repeating the same words over and over. "We've lost Eagle 1. Eagle 2 is down. Repeat, Eagle 2 is down." Caroline ripped the headset from him. "Give me the channel." Her voice cut through his sobbing. He stared at her for a moment, then surrendered it. She pressed the receiver to her ear. "This is Sergeant Hale. Identify remaining aircraft." Silence for 2 beats, then a broken voice came through. "This is Raven 6. I'm hit, losing hydraulics, can't hold altitude." The sound cut into static. "Raven 6, eject if you have to. Call your coordinates once you're down." The officer in charge, a colonel whose uniform was torn and dusted with plaster, turned on her. "Sergeant, who gave you authority?" He stopped when another explosion rattled the building, blowing out what was left of the eastern windows. The ceiling groaned and dust fell in a choking wave. Caroline didn't flinch. "Sir, with all due respect, your air wing is gone. Ground forces are scattered. If we don't organize now, this base is done." His jaw clenched, torn between pride and the reality bleeding around them. Finally he nodded. "Then organize. Buy us time. Reinforcements are 3 hours out if they even make it." 3 hours. It might as well have been 3 lifetimes. Caroline threw the headset back at the comms tech. "Patch me to all surviving squads. Tight formation around the north perimeter. Use what armor is left, funnel them toward choke points. Tell anyone with heavy ordnance to get to the supply yard." She turned back to the colonel. "Where's the SEAL detachment?" "They were mobilizing at Hangar 9. If it's still standing." She didn't wait. She bolted back into the chaos, weaving through flame and smoke, her rifle up, finger near the trigger. The enemy was advancing, but not in a reckless rush. This was coordinated, disciplined. She caught glimpses of them between the haze, moving like shadows, using the wreckage for cover. Whoever they were, they weren't the ragtag militia most of the soldiers expected. A burst of gunfire pinned her down near the carcass of a transport truck. She returned fire in controlled bursts, forcing the attackers to duck. Her magazine ran dry faster than she wanted. Sliding a fresh one in, she muttered under her breath, "Always when it's bad." The sound of boots hitting ground pulled her attention. A team of SEALs emerged from the smoke, faces smeared with soot, weapons at the ready. Their captain, a tall man with lines of exhaustion etched deep into his features, spotted her immediately. "Your army?" he said, not as a question but as a challenge. "Sergeant Hale, infantry," she replied. His gaze lingered, as though weighing her in those brief seconds where lives depended on trust. Finally he asked the question that would stick in her memory forever. "Is there a combat pilot here?" The air was alive with fire, and for a moment Caroline almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A pilot? Their pilots were either dead or burning out in the sky. She knew it, the SEALs knew it, and yet something inside her stirred. "I'm rated," she said quietly. The words almost choked her. She hadn't flown in 2 years, not since a crash during training grounded her to the infantry. A piece of shrapnel in her left shoulder had ended her flight career, or so command had decided. The SEAL captain tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Rated enough to get a bird in the air and make a difference? Another mortar landed, close enough to rattle the metal frame of the ruined truck. She could feel her pulse hammering in her neck. If there's a bird left standing, yes. He didn't hesitate. Then you're with me. They moved fast. The SEAL team formed a protective ring as they made their way toward what was left of Hangar 9. Caroline's boots slipped on scorched tarmac, her lungs burning with every breath of smoke. 2 more soldiers joined their group, one dragging a wounded comrade whose leg was a mangled ruin. Caroline grabbed the other side without a word, helping haul him until they reached the hangar's shadow. Inside, the devastation was complete. Aircraft lay in twisted ruin, wings torn off, fuselages charred black. But in the far corner, partially shielded by collapsed scaffolding, one helicopter stood, scarred but intact. A Black Hawk. Caroline's chest tightened. She'd spent hundreds of hours in that very model, its controls etched into her memory like the lines of her own hand. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing the scorched metal. "Can you get it airborne?" the captain asked. Caroline glanced back at him, smoke and fire dancing in her eyes. "If the fuel tanks aren't punctured and the rotors aren't bent, I can fly it." The SEALs spread out instantly, securing the perimeter while 2 of them checked the helicopter. "Fuel's low but clean. Hydraulics look stable. She'll fly." "Then let's go," Caroline said. It wasn't that simple. Ammunition crates were scattered near the hangar entrance, and enemy fire poured in like a flood. Bullets shredded the air, sparks bouncing off twisted steel. The SEALs fired back, moving with precision, but they were outnumbered. Caroline dropped behind a crate, firing in tight bursts, cutting down a pair of advancing hostiles. Her shoulder throbbed with every recoil, but adrenaline drowned the pain. The SEAL captain crouched beside her. "Once you're airborne, we'll need you for cover. We can't hold this perimeter without air support." "Copy that," she said, though her heart raced. She wasn't sure she could still handle the controls under fire. Doubt gnawed at her. Edges, whispering of the crash that had grounded her, of the bodies pulled from the wreckage that day. But doubt wouldn't save anyone here. They made the push together. 2 SEALs hauled open the side doors while Caroline scrambled into the cockpit. Her hands trembled as they brushed over familiar switches. She inhaled once, deeply, then exhaled as muscle memory took over. Batteries on. Fuel flow engaged. Rotors priming. The hum filled her ears like an old friend waking from a deep sleep. Outside, the firefight raged. The SEALs were shouting, bullets pinging against the fuselage. One of them went down, hit in the neck, blood spraying across the scorched concrete. Another dragged him back, screaming for a medic. Caroline's jaw clenched. There was no medic coming, not yet. She pressed the ignition. The Black Hawk roared, its rotors spinning faster, chopping the smoke into chaotic swirls. She checked the gauges, ignored the warning lights blinking red, and pulled the collective. The helicopter shuddered, groaned, then lifted. For a heartbeat, she thought it would collapse under its own weight. But then they were rising, the ground falling away beneath them. The SEAL captain's voice cut through her headset. "If you can hear me, Sergeant, we need fire support along the North Road. They're pushing hard." "Copy," she said, swinging the bird around. The landscape stretched before her, a nightmare of flame, smoke, and running figures. She spotted the convoy, armored trucks bristling with weapons rolling through the breach in the perimeter. Her hands moved on instinct. She lined up the Black Hawk's mounted guns and unleashed hell. Tracers lit the sky, ripping into the convoy. One truck exploded in a fireball, another veered off the road, its occupants scattering. The ground troops cheered, their voices faint but filled with desperate hope. Caroline's chest heaved, sweat dripping down her neck. She wasn't just flying, she was alive again in a way she hadn't been since before the crash. Yet even as she carved destruction into the enemy line, she knew this was only the beginning. The enemy would adapt, regroup. Reinforcements were still hours away. "Captain," she said into the comms, her voice steady despite the chaos, "tell your men to hold. I'll keep the skies clear as long as I can." "Understood," he replied. "And Sergeant, good to have you up there." Caroline allowed herself the briefest flicker of a smile before banking hard to avoid incoming fire. Every decision from here on out would mean life or death. For her, for the men and women below, for the base itself. And deep down, she knew there was no turning back. The war had found her again. And this time, she would not run from it. The night bled fire across the horizon. Caroline's Black Hawk swept low over the battlefield, the rotors pounding the air so violently it felt like the earth itself was trembling in fear. Below, tracer rounds clawed upward, streaks of light like vengeful fingers trying to drag her from the sky. She banked hard, pressing her shoulder against the harness, her muscles screaming as she forced the helicopter to obey. The SEAL captain's voice crackled in her headset. North perimeter collapsing. I've got men pinned behind a transport. We need you now. Copy, she said, breath ragged. She scanned through the haze, spotting the flashes of gunfire where his men were trapped. Enemy fighters moved in disciplined formations, cutting off escape routes, pressing forward like a tide that wouldn't stop until it drowned them all. Caroline dropped altitude. The ground surged closer, the smell of smoke flooding her nostrils through the vents. She squeezed the trigger and the Black Hawk's gun screamed. Bullets shredded the attackers, their silhouettes jerking and collapsing under the withering storm. The survivors scattered, scrambling for cover, giving the SEALs enough breathing room to push forward. Good hit, the captain called out. You just bought us 30 more seconds of life. Caroline grimaced. 30 seconds. That was how desperate they were now, life measured in half a minute of reprieve. She pulled the helicopter back into the smoke-filled sky, scanning the battlefield. Fires devoured entire sections of the base. Vehicles burned, their twisted hulks glowing red against the darkness. Somewhere to the east, ammunition stores had caught fire, and every few minutes, another explosion tore through the night, hurling debris like shrapnel from an angry god. Her stomach clenched as she spotted movement along the southern perimeter. A column of enemy vehicles was snaking in, heavy armor leading the way. She counted at least 6 armored personnel carriers, their turrets glinting with the promise of destruction. Command, this is Hale. South perimeter breached. They've got armor rolling in. Static, then the colonel's broken voice. We've got nothing left to stop them. Our tanks are gone. If they push through, it's over. Caroline felt the weight of those words like a stone in her chest. Over. As if that was something she could allow. She bit down hard on her lip, tasting blood, her hands tightening on the controls. Not yet, she muttered. She pulled the Black Hawk into a dive, lining up on the lead APC. The targeting reticle danced over the armored beast and she squeezed the trigger. The mounted rockets spat fire, streaking down like furious comets. The explosion lit up the night, the APC erupting in flames, its turret spinning uselessly into the dirt. Cheers crackled faintly over the comms. For one fleeting second, hope felt real again. But then the others kept rolling. 5 more, relentless, grinding over the wreckage of their lead vehicle like it was nothing. Caroline cursed under her breath. She had limited munitions. A few more rockets, maybe a couple belts for the guns. Once that was gone, all she'd have was her maneuvering, and luck. The SEAL captain's voice came again, calmer than it had any right to be. You can't stop them all from up there. I don't have a choice, she shot back. There was silence for a beat. Then, maybe we can help. She caught movement below. The SEAL team had regrouped, dragging crates of explosives from a destroyed supply depot. She understood immediately. All right, she said, her voice steadier now. You plant it, I'll herd them. The plan unfolded in seconds. Caroline swooped low, guns blazing at the convoy. The vehicles braked, slowed, maneuvered to adjust to her strafing runs. She didn't need to destroy them all, she just needed to steer them where the SEALs wanted them. She cut across their path, drawing fire, the windshield cracking as rounds peppered the fuselage. Warning lights screamed at her, but she ignored them, muscles straining as she forced the helicopter to climb again. Below, the SEALs worked fast, rigging the road with explosives, their dark figures darting in and out of the smoke. Caroline circled, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her body running on pure adrenaline. Charges set, the captain's voice finally came. Bring them in. She dived again, tearing across the convoy's flank, unleashing her last rockets. 2 more APCs erupted in fireballs, their hulks clogging the road. The rest funneled straight into the trap. Now. The night split apart as the explosives detonated. Fire ripped through the convoy, flipping vehicles like toys, scattering burning metal across the ground. The shockwave rocked Caroline's helicopter, the controls jerking violently in her hands. For a moment she thought she'd lost it, but then she steadied, pulling the bird back up into the air. Silence followed. A terrible, heavy silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant screams of the wounded. The southern perimeter held, for now. The captain's voice came again, low and grim. Nice flying. You just saved our asses. Caroline exhaled, slumping slightly against the harness. But there was no relief. She knew better than to think it was over. Her radio crackled with a new voice, panicked, desperate. This is Raven 6. Down south of the ridge. Hostiles closing in, I need immediate evac. Caroline's blood froze. The pilot she'd heard earlier, the one who'd ejected, he was alive. But not for long if she didn't move. Copy Raven 6. I'm inbound, she said, already swinging the Black Hawk toward the coordinates. Sergeant, the SEAL captain cut in, you go after him, you'll leave the base without air cover. She hesitated, jaw tight. It was the impossible choice. Protect the base or save a fellow pilot. Either way, lives would be lost. Her mind raced. She thought of the colonel's words, the desperate soldiers still clinging to their posts, the civilians evacuated hours earlier counting on them to hold. Then she thought of Raven 6, alone in the dark, surrounded by enemies, his life measured in seconds now. I'll make it quick, she said finally. Hold the line until I'm back. No time for argument. She pushed the Black Hawk hard, the rotors straining as she skimmed over the ridge. The landscape shifted to rocky terrain, shadows stretching long and jagged. She scanned the ground, eyes darting between the instruments and the chaos below. Then she saw him, a flare burning weakly near a broken tree-line, the silhouette of a man limping toward it. And around him, like wolves closing in, enemy fighters. Caroline descended fast, guns tearing into the approaching hostiles. They scattered, diving for cover, but not before two went down in the dirt. She flared the helicopter, side door sliding open as one of the SEALs leaned out, arm extended. Move, Raven. Now. The downed pilot sprinted, stumbling, his flight suit torn and bloodied. Bullets snapped past him, kicking up dirt. He leapt for the door, the SEAL grabbing his arm, hauling him inside. Got him. Caroline pulled up hard, the Black Hawk surging skyward as rounds chased them into the dark. Her chest heaved, relief mixing with dread. Every risk she took stacked the odds higher against her, but she couldn't stop. Not when lives hung on every decision. Base, this is Hale. Raven 6 recovered. Returning now. The colonel's reply came broken, static-laced. We're holding but just barely. Enemy regrouping, heavier forces incoming. Caroline's stomach twisted. Heavier forces. As if what they'd faced so far wasn't already enough to crush them. She glanced back at the rescued pilot, his face pale, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He met her gaze, eyes burning with gratitude and pain. You didn't have to, he rasped. Yes, she said quietly, turning back to the controls. I did. The base came back into view, still burning, still fighting. Caroline's grip tightened. Every choice she made tonight carried weight, ripples of consequence that would stretch far beyond this battlefield. And deep down, she knew the hardest choices were still ahead. The war wasn't just around her anymore. It was inside her, carving away everything she thought she was, leaving only what she had to become. Caroline brought the Black Hawk down rougher than she liked, skidding over scorched tarmac until the skid screeched to a halt. Dust and fire swallowed the air around her, the base reduced to a nightmare of flame-lit silhouettes. The rotors thumped overhead as if matching the pulse hammering inside her skull. She didn't even have time to breathe before the SEAL captain pulled the wounded pilot out of the side door, barking for medics who were nowhere to be found. Sergeant Hale, the captain shouted over the roar, you've got half the base believing they might live through this. Don't stop now. Caroline wiped grime from her face with the back of her glove. The words barely sank in. What mattered was the steady crawl of headlights on the southern horizon. More enemy reinforcements. Trucks. Armor. Infantry swarming behind them like ants. She felt her stomach clench. We can't hold this with what's left, she muttered. Then we don't hold, the captain said flatly. We bleed them until reinforcements get here. His pragmatism was sharp, cold, but it was survival. Caroline knew it too well. She climbed back into the cockpit, checked fuel, checked ammunition. Both were running dry. She had maybe 15 minutes of fight left in her bird, maybe less. The colonel's voice rasped through her headset. Sergeant Hale, report. Still airborne, she said. You're our only air support. The west gate has collapsed. They'll breach command within the hour. Caroline gritted her teeth. She had seconds to decide where to commit, protect command or intercept the convoy pouring from the south. Both couldn't be covered. She looked toward the SEAL captain, who was reloading with methodical calm. Which do you pick? She asked him bluntly. His eyes flicked to the flames swallowing the command post, then to the endless flow of enemies pushing from the south. He didn't blink. Cut the south. If they overrun us from there, none of it matters. Command dies either way. It was a brutal truth, but truth nonetheless. Caroline turned the helicopter, pushing the throttle until the Black Hawk lurched forward into the smoke. Her heart pounded with the sound of the rotors, the air thick with static and fire. The convoy was closer than she'd feared. Trucks lined with mounted guns, armored carriers bristling like steel beasts. She dropped low, unleashing her last burst of rockets. 2 trucks erupted into molten fire, their crews hurled screaming into the dirt. For a moment the line faltered. But then return fire lit up the night. Streams of tracers clawed for her, punching through the fuselage, rattling the entire frame. Warning alarms screamed in her ears. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Rotor RPM fluctuating. Caroline forced the bird steady, sweat running into her eyes. She squeezed the trigger, the Black Hawk's guns chewing through more infantry. Blood and dirt sprayed into the air as men scattered, their formations collapsing under her storm. "Keep pressure," the SEAL captain shouted over comms. She could hear his team below, advancing, setting ambushes, using her cover fire to push forward. Her ammo counter blinked red. She had less than a belt left. Her throat went dry. "Command, this is Hale," she said, her voice tight. "I'm black on rockets. Ammo nearly gone. You've got 10 minutes of air support left." The colonel's reply was grim, almost broken. "Then make those 10 minutes count, Sergeant." She banked again, lining up on another APC. She emptied the last of her rockets, the explosion tearing its turret clean off. But as she pulled back, something slammed into her side. The helicopter shuddered violently. "Missile hit," one of the SEALs shouted from the back. Caroline fought the controls with everything she had. Warning lights flooded the panel. The tail rotor was gone. The Black Hawk spun, the world outside blurring into streaks of fire and smoke. She yanked at the cyclic, muscles burning, every nerve screaming. "Brace," she shouted. The helicopter slammed into the ground, metal shrieking as it tore across the dirt. Flames licked at the cockpit. Caroline's head snapped forward, pain exploding across her skull. Darkness clawed at her vision, but she forced her eyes open. She couldn't black out. Not now. Her harness released with a groan, and she dragged herself out of the burning cockpit. The SEAL stumbled free, coughing, bloodied but alive. The captain grabbed her arm, pulling her away as the Black Hawk's fuel ignited behind them, sending a fireball roaring into the sky. "You good?" he demanded. Caroline's legs shook, her shoulder screamed, but she nodded. Still breathing. "Then we move." They were on foot now. No more air cover. No more fire raining from the sky. Just boots, bullets, and desperation. The convoy pressed forward, engines roaring, enemy fighters shouting in a language Caroline didn't understand but recognized well enough. It was the sound of death approaching. The SEALs fell back toward the inner perimeter, Caroline covering their retreat with her rifle. Every shot counted. Every trigger squeeze meant one less enemy pushing closer. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but her hands were steady. They reached the command post just as the west gate collapsed completely. Enemy forces poured through, overwhelming the few defenders still standing. Chaos erupted, gunfire, screams, explosions tearing the night apart. "Fall back to the inner compound," the colonel shouted, his face streaked with soot and blood. He caught sight of Caroline and the SEALs. "You, Sergeant, you're still alive?" "Not sure how," she rasped. "Then get your people inside. We're down to the last line." The inner compound was a fortress within the base, thick concrete walls reinforced with steel. It was their last stand. Soldiers scrambled behind sandbags, setting up machine guns, dragging ammo crates into position. The wounded lay in rows, medics working frantically with dwindling supplies. The air stank of blood and antiseptic, fear and resolve. Caroline dropped beside the SEAL captain behind a sandbag wall. Her rifle was nearly empty, her body trembling with exhaustion. She locked eyes with him. "How long until reinforcements?" she asked. "Too long," he said simply. She looked around at the faces of the soldiers, young, old, men, women, all staring at the enemy approaching through the smoke. Some whispered prayers. Others clenched their weapons with white-knuckled fists. No one ran. Caroline felt something stir deep in her chest. The same thing she'd felt in the cockpit. The same thing that had pushed her into the sky when everyone else hesitated. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting because giving up wasn't in her blood. The first wave hit. Gunfire tore across the compound, bullets pinging against the walls, ricocheting off steel. Caroline squeezed her trigger, dropping one enemy then another. The SEALs moved like shadows, precise and lethal, their weapons never wasting a shot. But the enemy kept coming. For every man who fell, 2 more surged forward. Grenades arced through the air, detonating in blasts of dirt and shrapnel. Soldiers screamed, medics dragged bodies back, and still the line held. Caroline's magazine ran dry. She slammed in her last one, her mind cold, calculating. She couldn't think about the future. Only the next shot. Only the next breath. The colonel shouted above the chaos, his voice raw. "We hold this compound or we die in it." Caroline's rifle clicked empty again. She pulled her sidearm, firing until the slide locked back. Smoke stung her eyes, blood ran down her arm from a fresh cut, but she didn't stop. Somewhere deep inside the compound, a radio crackled. A voice broke through the static, distant, but clear enough to ignite a spark of hope. "This is Hammer 2-1. Reinforcements inbound. Hold your position." Caroline froze, chest heaving, ears ringing. Reinforcements. They were coming. She looked at the SEAL captain. His face was grim, but his eyes burned with the faintest trace of relief. "We're not dead yet," he said. Caroline nodded once, gripping her empty weapon like it still mattered. Not dead yet. But the night was far from over. The enemy roared again, surging for the compound with renewed fury. And Caroline knew that before reinforcements could break through, they would have to endure the worst storm of their lives. The dust never seemed to settle. Even long after the last explosion had rocked the ground, the air hung thick with powder, smoke and the bitter tang of cordite. Captain Sarah Donovan sat cross-legged against a broken wall, helmet at her side, eyes on the horizon that glowed faintly orange from burning fuel. Her breathing was steady now, but her hands trembled just enough to betray the truth. Her nerves hadn't caught up with her calm. She pulled a battered notebook from her vest pocket and scribbled quickly, her pencil scratching against paper. It was a ritual of hers. Some wrote reports, some drowned in silence. Sarah wrote quick notes, thoughts, half-remembrances, lessons. Tonight the words felt heavier than ever. "You're still writing in that thing?" Sergeant Cole muttered, limping past her, his arm bound in a makeshift sling. His grin was crooked, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "Somebody has to remember all this," Sarah said without looking up. "The dust won't." Cole chuckled and dropped beside her with a grunt, his rifle laid across his lap. "Dust doesn't have to. Neither do we, technically." Sarah smirked faintly, then shut the notebook. The banter was their armor, fragile but necessary. Yet beneath it, she knew the decisions she had made in the last 72 hours carried weight that couldn't be joked away. 3 men hadn't come back. Good men. And the mission wasn't over. The SEAL captain, Ramirez, approached, his broad shoulders casting long shadows in the flickering light. He looked every bit as worn as the rest of them, but there was still something unbreakable in his posture. "We move at 0400. Intel confirms the convoy with the warlord is headed through the gorge north of here. If we miss it, we lose our shot." Sarah's chest tightened. The gorge was narrow, jagged, the perfect kill box, but not for them. For anyone reckless enough to walk into it. She knew the terrain, a nightmare of choke points, cliffs ideal for ambushes and only one road in and out. "Which means they know we'll try," she said flatly. Ramirez nodded. "Exactly." Cole groaned. "So we're walking right into hell again?" "Not walking," Sarah corrected, standing and stretching her stiff legs. "Flying." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "You're volunteering that bird of yours again?" Sarah's lips pressed into a line. The helicopter was patched, barely operational after the last run. She had spent hours with the mechanics, sleeves rolled up, fighting to make the rotors turn smooth and the electronics respond. It wasn't pretty, but it was airborne. "We won't get a second chance," she said. "If the convoy makes it past the gorge, he disappears into the mountains. We'll never track him. I'll fly." For a long moment, Ramirez said nothing, only studied her with those piercing eyes of his. Then he gave the faintest nod. "You've got guts, Captain. But guts don't keep you alive. Skill does. Don't confuse the two." Sarah's jaw clenched. "I know the difference." Later, in the dim light of a lantern, she gathered her unit. The small circle of soldiers leaned close, faces drawn but attentive. These were the men and women she had led through fire, people who had put their lives in her hands more times than she could count. "We hit them at first light," she explained, tracing the gorge with her finger on a dirt map. "The SEAL team will block the western exit, we'll cut off the eastern. My bird provides cover fire and eyes in the sky. Timing is everything. We collapse on them before they realize what's happening." Private Harlow, the youngest of them, chewed his lip nervously. "And if they're ready for us?" Sarah looked him dead in the eyes. "Then we adapt. But we don't hesitate. We've come too far to flinch now." Silence followed, thick with tension, until Corporal Daniels cracked a grin. "Guess it's another day in paradise." The small ripple of laughter that followed wasn't much, but it loosened the coil of fear wound tight in their guts. Sarah allowed herself a faint smile before dismissing them. When the camp fell quiet, she sat alone with her notebook again. Her hand hovered over the page, then finally wrote, "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's carrying it with you into the fire." At 0350 the camp stirred alive. Boots stomped, weapons clinked, murmured curses filled the air as soldiers readied for what could very well be their last dawn. Sarah moved through them, checking straps, clapping shoulders, steadying nerves. She saved her own preparations for last, pulling her helmet tight and strapping in her sidearm. As she approached the helicopter, her chest tightened. The machine stood like a wounded beast, patched scars gleaming under moonlight. She ran her hand along the side, whispering under her breath, "One more fight. Just one." Cole appeared beside her, his sling gone, arm moving stiff but functional. "You sure about this, Captain?" "No," she admitted. "But that's never stopped us before." The gorge loomed by sunrise, jagged walls rising like broken teeth against the horizon. Sarah's helicopter thumped low through the sky, blades chopping rhythm into the tense silence. Below, Ramirez's SEALs crept into position, shadows weaving between boulders and brush. Her soldiers crouched on the eastern ridge, rifles braced, eyes sharp. And then they came. The convoy appeared as dust plumes first, then the growl of engines. Armored trucks, technicals with mounted guns, and in the center, a reinforced transport bristling with guards. Sarah's throat tightened. The warlord had to be inside. "Wait," Ramirez's voice crackled over comms. "Wait." The seconds stretched, unbearable. Sarah's palms sweated on the controls. Every instinct screamed to strike, but she held steady. Timing was everything. "Now!" Ramirez barked. Chaos erupted. Explosions shook the gorge as charges detonated, blocking the exits. Gunfire roared, echoing like thunder. Sarah dove the helicopter low, rockets streaking into the lead truck, flipping it in a fireball. Bullets rattled against her hull as she swung hard, giving her soldiers cover. "Go! Go!" she shouted into the radio. Her team surged forward, rifles blazing, cutting down surprised guards. But the enemy wasn't unprepared. They responded fast, scrambling into defensive positions, unleashing withering fire. Sarah gritted her teeth, weaving the helicopter through the storm. A mounted gun swiveled toward her. She pulled hard, banking just as tracers screamed past the cockpit. Cole's voice rang out over comms. "We've got contact left flank, pinned down. Hold your ground." Sarah snapped, firing another rocket that shattered the technical. "You break, we all break." Below, she saw Harlow stumble, blood spraying from his shoulder. Two soldiers dragged him back, but the sight hit Sarah like a knife. Every loss was personal, every drop of blood a weight on her chest. The convoy's central transport swerved, trying to reverse. Sarah narrowed her eyes. Not today. She slammed the bird into a dive, unleashing the last of her rockets. The explosion ripped through the road, blocking the escape. But victory was never that simple. From the cliffs above, enemy fighters appeared, dozens of them, RPGs on their shoulders. Sarah's stomach dropped. She yanked the controls, shouting into the radio, "RPGs! Top of the ridge!" Too late. The first rocket struck her tail. The helicopter bucked violently, alarms screaming, metal shrieking as fire licked across the fuselage. Sarah fought the controls with every ounce of strength, her teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached. Birds hit. Going down. The world became a blur of spinning sky and jagged rock. Soldiers below scattered as the helicopter roared into the gorge, slamming down in a crash of twisted steel and fire. Bang. Blinding, searing pain. Sarah's vision swam as she clawed at her harness, coughing through smoke. Somewhere behind her, the engine burned, a demonic roar. Her hands trembled, blood dripping from her brow, but she forced herself free. The fight still raged outside. She could hear it, gunfire, screams, the metallic clatter of war. Her soldiers needed her. She staggered from the wreck, pistol in hand, her uniform scorched and torn. Cole's voice shouted her name, but all she could focus on was the warlord's transport, still intact, guards swarming around it. She raised her pistol, heart pounding, and began to walk forward. Every step hurt. Every breath burned. But her eyes locked on that transport, unflinching. And though the battlefield swirled in chaos, one truth seared into her mind. This was the moment that would define everything. The world reeled in fragments of sound and color, shouts, gunfire, the acrid sting of smoke in her lungs. Sarah Donovan's knees buckled as she stumbled from the burning helicopter, her pistol heavy in her hand. Blood streaked down her temple, but her vision sharpened as it locked onto the reinforced transport. The warlord was in there. She was sure of it. Bullets cracked overhead, pinging against twisted metal. Cole's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain! Get down." But Sarah didn't drop. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed that hesitation meant failure, and failure meant more of her people dead. She raised her pistol and fired at the guards rushing from the transport. 2 shots dropped one man, another ducked behind cover. Cole slid in beside her, dragging her toward a boulder. "You're bleeding like hell, Donovan. You can't just." "I'm fine," she snapped, though her voice trembled. She wasn't fine, but it didn't matter. She forced her body upright, pressing her shoulder against the rock. "Where's Ramirez?" Cole pointed across the gorge. The SEAL captain was pinned with half his team near the western block, exchanging heavy fire with entrenched fighters. The ambush had turned both ridges into killing grounds. Sarah's radio crackled. Ramirez's voice was strained, breathless. "We're stuck. They've got numbers and elevation. You still in the fight?" She clicked her comms, still breathing. "The bird's down. But we can't stay pinned. If they get that transport turned around, this was for nothing." "Then we take the ridges," Ramirez growled. "Flush those RPGs before they bury us all." Sarah glanced up at the cliffs. Enemy silhouettes darted between rocks, shadows against the blazing sun. Every second they stayed, more rockets could rain down. "Daniels? Harlow?" she barked into comms. "Daniels here, Harlow's hit bad but alive," came the reply. "Get a team up that eastern ridge now." "Clear. Cole, you're with me." Cole gave her a look, half disbelief, half grim respect. "You're concussed, bleeding, and you still want to climb a mountain under fire? Do you see another option?" she shot back. He sighed, chambered around. "Fair enough. After you, Captain." They broke from cover, sprinting toward the base of the ridge. Gunfire snapped around them, kicking up dirt and stone. Sarah slid behind a boulder, chest heaving. She felt her legs tremble, not from fear but from the crash's impact still echoing through her body. She clenched her teeth, forcing her muscles to obey. Cole fired bursts to suppress as they scrambled up the incline, hands clawing at jagged rock. The climb was brutal, but adrenaline drove her. Halfway up, a fighter leaned over the rim, raising an RPG. Sarah didn't think. She raised her pistol, squeezed the trigger. The man toppled backward, the launcher tumbling from his hands. "Nice shot," Cole muttered, hauling himself higher. They crested the ridge into a storm of chaos. Enemy fighters entrenched in shallow cover turned in shock as Sarah and Cole emerged. Sarah dove into a roll, snatching up an abandoned rifle and opened fire. Cole flanked left, laying down bursts that forced the fighters to scatter. It was brutal, close combat. Grenades thumped, sending dirt and bodies into the air. Sarah's ears rang as she fired until the magazine clicked empty. She reloaded with shaking hands, heart pounding like a drum. Daniel's squad appeared moments later, surging up the slope to reinforce. Together they swept the ridge in bloody, desperate fighting. When it was done, Sarah stood among the smoking craters, chest heaving, sweat stinging her eyes. The eastern ridge was theirs. "Status, Ramirez?" she gasped into her comm. "Static then, we're clear on the west. Took heavy casualties but ridge is secure. Convoys boxed in." Sarah staggered to the edge of the cliff, peering down. The gorge was a wreck, burning trucks, shattered bodies, smoke curling into the sky. But the transport still sat intact, guarded by diehards who refused to break. And then, movement. The transport's back door swung open. A tall figure in desert fatigues emerged, flanked by armed men. Even from this distance, Sarah felt her pulse spike. The warlord. The butcher who had financed countless raids, who had burned villages and executed civilians by the dozens. "There," she shouted. "Target on the field." Her soldiers opened fire, bullets sparking against the transport. The warlord's guards dragged him behind cover, returning fire with ruthless precision. Ramirez's voice roared through comms. "We're cutting him off. Push forward." Sarah didn't hesitate. She slid down the ridge with Cole, boots skidding on loose gravel, landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through her legs, but she forced herself upright, rifle raised. They advanced under covering fire, darting from boulder to boulder, closing in on the transport. Bullets whined past, one tearing through Sarah's sleeve. She didn't flinch. Her world had narrowed to a single point, the warlord. Cole dropped beside her, panting. "This is insane." "Welcome to my headspace," she muttered. Together they pushed forward, every step bought with blood and bullets. Her team closed the noose, Ramirez's SEALs converging from the west. The warlord's guards fought viciously, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. Sarah vaulted over a smoking truck, firing as she landed. A guard fell. Another charged, blade flashing. She spun, slammed her rifle butt into his jaw and finished him with a round to the chest. The transport loomed closer. Her breath came ragged, her arms heavy, but her focus burned white-hot. Then, sudden silence. Gunfire dwindled, replaced by groans and the crackle of fire. The last of the guards lay dead or dying. And there, crouched behind the ruined transport, was the warlord. His eyes met Sarah's, dark, unyielding, almost calm. "Drop it," she shouted, rifle trained on him. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately he raised his hands. Ramirez approached from the other side, weapon ready. His seals fanned out, covering angles. Sarah's chest heaved. It was over. Against every odd they had done it. But as Ramirez stepped forward to secure the prisoner, the warlord spoke. His voice was low, accented, but steady. "You think this ends with me?" Sarah's stomach tightened. "You've cut off a hand," he continued. "The body still moves. You cannot kill what you do not understand." Before Ramirez could react, the warlord lunged, not at Sarah, not at Ramirez, but toward the transport. His hand slammed down on a concealed detonator. Sarah's eyes widened. "Bomb?" she screamed. The explosion ripped the gorge apart. The transport erupted in fire, shockwaves slamming through the canyon. Sarah was thrown back, ears ringing, lungs crushed by the blast. Rocks tumbled from the cliffs, dust engulfing everything. When she came to, the world was muffled chaos. She pushed herself up, coughing blood, vision blurred. Bodies littered the ground, friend and foe alike. The transport was gone, a crater in its place. Ramirez stumbled into view, bloodied but alive. He grabbed Sarah's shoulder, shouting words she could barely hear. "We need to move." Secondary collapse, now. Through the haze, Sarah saw Cole limping toward them, dragging another wounded soldier. The cliffs groaned above, rocks tumbling. The gorge was coming down. Sarah's mind screamed at her to move, to run, but she couldn't stop staring at the crater where the warlord had been. His words echoed, haunting. "You cannot kill what you do not understand." Was he just another zealot, or had they triggered something larger, something darker than they imagined? "Captain?" Cole's voice snapped her back. She staggered to her feet, helping Ramirez haul the wounded. Together, they scrambled up the shattered slope as the gorge crumbled behind them. Dust and stone rained down, the earth itself trying to bury the truth of what had just happened. By the time they reached the ridge, half their force was gone. The survivors collapsed, coughing, bleeding, eyes wide with shock. Sarah ripped off her helmet, dropping to her knees. Her lungs burned, her ears rang, her body screamed in pain, but worse than any of it was the hollow weight in her chest. They had come for a victory, and all they had was ruin. Ramirez sat beside her, face grim. "We got him." Sarah shook her head slowly. "Did we? Or did he get us?" The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Because deep down, Sarah knew the truth. This war wasn't close to ending. If anything, it had just begun. The night after the gorge was eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, no whisper of wind, just the soft crackle of smoldering wreckage in the distance. The survivors had pulled themselves to higher ground, gathering in the broken ruins of an abandoned watch post, its walls pockmarked from battles long past. Sarah Donovan sat hunched over a small lantern, wrapping a bandage tight around her ribs. Every movement was agony, each breath cutting like a knife. Her arms trembled as she tied the knot, blood still seeping beneath the cloth. Across from her, Ramirez cleaned his rifle with methodical precision, face shadowed by exhaustion. Cole was nearby, his arm hastily splinted after the fall, but his sharp wit hadn't dulled. "You know," he muttered, watching Sarah struggle with the bandage, "most sane people would have stayed down after getting blown out of the sky." Sarah grunted. "Lucky for you, I'm not most people." "Lucky?" He snorted. "That's not the word I'd use." Despite everything, the death, the smoke still etched into her lungs, Sarah allowed herself the faintest smirk. Their banter had become more than survival, it was defiance. But not everyone could muster the same resilience. Private Harlow lay on a cot fashioned from scavenged planks, his face pale, shoulder wound hastily stitched. He stirred weakly, whispering something Sarah couldn't catch. Daniels leaned close, then looked up grimly. "He wants to know if we won." Sarah's throat tightened. She crossed the room, kneeling beside the young soldier. His eyes flickered open, glassy but searching. She forced herself to smile, brushing dirt from his brow. "We did what we came to do," she said softly. "The warlord's gone. You fought hard, Harlow. Harder than most ever could." He gave a faint nod, his lips twitching as if to smile. Then his eyes slid closed again. His chest still rose and fell but barely. Sarah stood, turning away before anyone could see the moisture in her eyes. The room was filled with silence until Ramirez finally broke it. "We need to move before dawn. The explosion will draw attention. Reinforcements, scavengers, whoever's left loyal to him, they'll be on us by morning." Cole grimaced. "And where exactly do you propose we go?" "Half of us are too banged up to march, the other half are running on fumes." "North," Ramirez said flatly. "There's an extraction point 2 clicks through the valley. If we make it we can call an evac. But if we stay here we die." Sarah leaned against the wall, closing her eyes briefly. Her body screamed for rest, but she knew Ramirez was right. The gorge hadn't ended the fight, it had only bought them a narrow window to escape. She pushed herself upright. "Then we move. Pack light, carry what you can. Leave nothing useful behind." The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. They scavenged ammunition, patched wounds with whatever supplies remained, and rigged stretchers for the gravely injured. Sarah carried more weight than she should have, refusing to let anyone see her falter. Every time her knees threatened to buckle, she forced them steady again. By the time the first pale streaks of dawn lit the horizon, they were already marching into the valley. It was a brutal trek. The terrain was uneven, jagged rock and loose gravel that made every step treacherous. The wounded slowed them, and every sound in the distance kept their nerves taut. Cole muttered at one point, voice low so only Sarah could hear, "You realize this feels less like a retreat and more like a funeral procession." Sarah gave a sharp look. "We're not dead yet." "Not yet," he echoed darkly. Hours stretched painfully. The sun climbed higher, turning the valley into an oven. Sweat drenched their uniforms, lips cracked from thirst. Water was scarce, and what little they had was rationed carefully. Harlow's stretcher was carried by 2 soldiers, their faces drawn with strain. Sarah checked on him every half hour, but his pulse was weakening. Each time she touched his wrist, she wondered if it would be the last. Ramirez kept to the front, moving with relentless determination. His presence was steady, but Sarah could see the cracks. His jaw clenched too tightly, his eyes scanning the horizon with restless intensity. He was a man calculating odds, and none of them were good. Midway through the valley, Daniels hissed, "Movement!" Everyone dropped, rifles raised. Sarah's heart hammered as shapes appeared on the ridge, a half-dozen figures silhouetted against the sky. For a moment no one moved. Then the figures lifted rifles. Contact! Gunfire erupted. The valley exploded with echoes as bullets ricocheted off stone. Sarah hit the ground, returning fire in controlled bursts. One of the enemy fell, but more appeared, scrambling down the slope. "They're flanking," Cole shouted. "Get the wounded behind cover," Sarah ordered, sprinting forward. She dove behind a boulder, breath ragged, firing at a fighter charging down the incline. The man crumpled, sliding lifelessly into the dust. Ramirez barked commands, his seals moving with deadly precision despite their injuries. But they were outnumbered. The enemy pressed harder, their shots relentless. A bullet smacked into the stone inches from Sarah's head. She ducked, heart hammering. Then she saw it, an RPG team setting up on the ridge. Her blood ran cold. "RPG!" she screamed, breaking from cover. She sprinted into the open, legs pumping despite the agony in her ribs. She raised her rifle, firing before the launcher could aim. One fighter fell, but the other swung the weapon toward her. Time slowed. She knew she couldn't reach cover. She knew this was it. But before the shot came, a crack rang out. The RPG wielder dropped, his weapon clattering to the ground. Sarah whipped around. Cole stood 20 meters back, rifle smoking, a grin splitting his grimy face. "You owe me for that one, Captain," he yelled. Sarah exhaled a shaky laugh, then dove back behind cover. The firefight dragged on for what felt like hours. Blood, dust, and screams filled the valley. One by one the enemy fighters fell until finally, the ridge went quiet. When silence returned, Sarah crawled out from cover, chest heaving. Around her the survivors emerged, battered but alive. The ground was littered with bodies. Too many. She turned to check on the wounded. Harlow was still breathing but barely. Daniels wasn't moving at all, a dark pool spreading beneath him. Sarah's chest tightened painfully. Another name to write in her notebook. Another ghost to carry. Ramirez strode up, wiping blood from his brow. "We can't stay. More will come. Move." So they moved, slower now, each step heavier than the last. By dusk, the extraction point came into view, a rocky plateau overlooking the valley, marked by an old communications tower. Relief rippled through the group, but Sarah felt none. The fight to reach it had cost them too much. They set perimeter defenses, flares ready to signal evac. As night fell, Sarah sat alone near the tower, staring at the dark horizon. Her notebook lay open in her lap, but she couldn't bring herself to write. Cole limped over, dropping beside her. He handed her a canteen. "You look like hell." "You should see how I feel," she muttered, sipping water. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You did good out there. We'd all be dead if it wasn't for you." Sarah shook her head. "We lost too many. Harlow's fading. Daniels is gone. The others?" Her voice cracked. She forced it steady. "Good doesn't feel like the right word." Cole sighed. "That's war, Captain. It's never clean. Never fair. But you kept us moving. That's what counts." She wanted to believe him. But the warlord's last words haunted her. "You cannot kill what you do not understand." Ramirez approached, his expression unreadable. He stood for a moment, then said, "Command will want a report. You should be the one to give it." Sarah looked up, startled. "Why me?" "Because you saw it through," he said simply. "You led when everything fell apart. They need to hear it from you." She nodded slowly, feeling the weight settle on her shoulders. As the stars spread across the night sky, the survivors huddled in uneasy silence. Somewhere far below, the war still burned. They had survived this day, but Sarah knew it was only a reprieve. The enemy wasn't gone. The warlord's death hadn't ended anything. If anything, it had awakened something larger. And she couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle hadn't even begun. Under the gray morning sky, the base stirred like a waking giant. Helicopters thrummed in the distance, and the rhythmic clank of metal doors echoed through the compound. For Captain Elena Ramirez, this morning felt heavier than most. Weeks of combat, relentless missions, and too many close calls had burned into her bones, but today carried the weight of something final, a sense that the choices she made in the coming hours would define not just her career, but her soldiers' lives and perhaps the course of the entire campaign. The operations room buzzed with energy. Screens displayed shifting maps of contested terrain, red markers indicating insurgent movements edging closer to a vital corridor. A convoy route that served as the backbone for resupply in the region had been cut off, ambushed by enemy forces who had fortified themselves in the mountains. It wasn't just a tactical problem, it was a chokehold. If they couldn't reclaim it, the forward bases would be starved of ammo, food, and medical supplies within days. A Navy SEAL commander leaned against the table, arms crossed, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "We've tried 3 pushes. None worked. The ridge is bristling with dug-in positions and anti-vehicle traps. We need something unconventional." Eyes shifted toward Elena. She didn't flinch. Instead, she studied the terrain map, her fingers drumming softly on the table. The enemy had chosen their ground well. Any frontal assault was suicide. But Elena's mind didn't work in straight lines. Her experience as a combat pilot and her instincts as a soldier fused into a singular vision. "We go around them," she said finally, her voice carrying quiet authority. "Not from the valley, not from the road. We go over. We insert small strike teams at night, high on the ridge, behind their fortifications. We cut their comms, take out their supplies, and when they're disoriented, we bring the convoy through under cover of a coordinated airstrike." The room went still. A colonel frowned. "That ridge is treacherous. High winds, thin air. Flying up there at night borders on insane." "Borders?" Elena said with the faintest trace of a grin. "Not crosses." A murmur of nervous laughter rippled through the room. But she was serious and they all knew it. When the meeting adjourned, her squad gathered around her outside. Sergeant Marcus Doyle, her second in command, shook his head. "You realize you just volunteered us for the craziest op of the war?" "Yeah," Elena replied, tightening the strap on her vest. "But crazy's our specialty." The preparations were grueling. Maps were studied, every possible landing zone measured against wind speeds and terrain hazards. The helicopters would fly dark, skimming dangerously close to jagged ridges. Supplies were packed with meticulous care, every ounce of weight accounted for. The soldiers moved with grim efficiency, cracking jokes only to bleed off nerves. That night, under a moonless sky, the operation began. The helicopters lifted off, their rotors muffled by night. Inside, Elena sat strapped near the door, eyes scanning the black expanse below. Beside her, Marcus adjusted his rifle, muttering, "I swear if I live through this, I'm retiring to a beach in Florida." You'd last 2 days, Elena said. You'd get bored, pick a fight with a seagull and end up back here. The soldiers chuckled, tension breaking just enough. The insertion was brutal. Winds buffeted the helicopters, pushing them dangerously close to rock faces. Elena felt every tilt and shudder in her gut, but the pilots held steady, coaxing the birds into hover positions while ropes unfurled. One by one, soldiers rappelled into the darkness, boots crunching into snow and loose stone. As Elena hit the ground, the air felt razor-thin, each breath a labor. The ridge stretched like a knife's edge, jagged silhouettes against the stars. She signaled the squad forward. Their mission: dismantle the enemy's advantage from within. The climb was punishing, the terrain unforgiving. Rocks slipped underfoot and icy gusts clawed at their faces. Every sound seemed magnified in the stillness, boots scraping, gear rattling, breaths ragged in the thin air. When they finally reached the enemy encampment, the sight was chilling. Trenches cut into the rock, heavy machine guns trained on the valley below, and fighters moving with the easy confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. Elena studied the layout, her mind mapping targets with surgical precision. Comm station there. Ammo depot on the left. Doyle, you take Alpha to the comms. I'll lead Bravo to the depot. We move silent until we can't. They split. Elena's group slithered through the rocks, closing in on the ammo cache stacked beneath camouflage netting. 2 guards stood watch, rifles slung lazily. Elena signaled. In seconds the guards were down, one silenced shot, one swift blade. The squad planted charges, working fast. Then came the crack of gunfire. Distant at first, then sharp and close. Marcus's team had been spotted. The ridge erupted with shouts and muzzle flashes, the night alive with chaos. Elena had no time to hesitate. Blow it, she ordered. The charges detonated in a thunderous blast, fire lighting the mountainside. Ammo cooked off, sending fiery trails into the sky. The enemy scrambled, their lines fractured by confusion and fear. Elena rallied her squad, pushing toward the sound of Marcus's fight. They found Alpha pinned behind rocks, bullets sparking off stone. Marcus grinned grimly when he saw her. Took you long enough. Saving your ass is becoming a habit, Elena shot back, laying down fire. Together, the squads pressed forward, their assault surgical, relentless. By the time the helicopters returned, the ridge was in flames, enemy positions shattered. The convoy rolled through the valley below, headlights like a lifeline cutting through the dark. But victory carried a price. 2 soldiers were down, their bodies carried silently back to the choppers. Elena sat in the hum of the rotor wash, blood spattered on her gear, her heart heavy. She had won the night, saved the supply line, but the cost etched deeper into her soul. Back at base, the men cheered their survival, laughter echoing through the barracks. But Elena sat apart, staring at the horizon. Marcus approached, beer in hand, offering it with a crooked smile. You did good, Captain. Damn good. Elena took it, her voice low. Tell that to the ones who didn't make it. Marcus sat beside her. They knew the stakes. We all do. But we follow you because you make it mean something. That's the difference. She looked at him, eyes weary but resolute. Then we keep moving. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. And as dawn broke over the battered mountains, Elena knew he was right. The ridge was theirs, the supply line open, but deeper battles loomed. The enemy wouldn't forget this humiliation. Retaliation would come, harder, bloodier. And when it did, she would have to stand again, bearing the weight of every life that followed her into the fire. The war had not ended. It had only shifted, becoming sharper, more personal. And somewhere in that uncertainty lay the shadow of decisions yet to come, decisions that would test the very limits of who Captain Elena Ramirez was, and what she was willing to sacrifice. The end.